Before we step into the shadowed streets of 1970s Moscow and unravel one of the most complex psychological operations of the Cold War, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us continue to declassify these forgotten histories. In the winter of 1976, the Soviet capital was a city of silence and watching eyes. On Kutuzovsky Prospect, in a building reserved for foreign diplomats and approved business personnel, a couple sat at their breakfast table. To the casual observer, and there were many, both human and electronic, Thomas and Sarah Reardon were the picture of American expatriate success. Thomas was a representative for a heavy machinery firm based in Illinois, a man with a firm handshake and a taste for imported scotch. Sarah was his elegant, art-loving wife, a woman who spent her days visiting galleries and hosting dinner parties for the limited expatriate community. They argued about mundane things, the draft from the window, the scarcity of fresh coffee, the way Thomas forgot to hang up his coat, to the KGB listening devices embedded in the plaster of their ceiling and the receiver in their telephone. They were boringly, predictably normal. But Thomas Reardon was actually Elias Thorne, a deep cover officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, and Sarah Reardon was not his wife, nor was her name Sarah. She was Julianne Vlessing, a linguistic specialist and intelligence asset recruited specifically for this operation. They were not married. They were not in love. They were two strangers legally bound by forged documents and a shared mission that carried a penalty of life imprisonment or worse. Their assignment, codenamed Operation Azure Zenith, was not to photograph missile silos or steal blueprints. It was far more intimate and far more dangerous. They were sent to Moscow to befriend a monster. Their target was Colonel Viktor Volkov, a rising star in the KGB's first chief directorate, a man known for his ruthlessness, his intellect, and his solitary guarded life. The CIA's psychological profile of Volkov suggested he was impenetrable to bribery and immune to blackmail. But the profile also noted a profound, crushing loneliness and a secret affinity for Western culture. The Reardons were designed to be the friends he never knew he wanted. To do that, Elias and Julianne had to live a lie 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, inside an apartment where privacy was a myth. They had to perform a marriage for an audience of hidden microphones, knowing that a single slip in character, a moment where they dropped the facade of husband and wife, would signal to the KGB that they were imposters. As Elias looked across the table at Julianne that morning in 1976, he didn't see a spouse. He saw a fellow operative. But he smiled, touched her hand and said, "I love you, darling," because he knew the microphone in the light fixture was listening. And in the high-stakes theater of Cold War Moscow, the performance was the only thing keeping them alive. To understand how two strangers ended up sharing a bed in the heart of the Soviet Union, we have to go back 2 years, to a safe house in the rolling hills of Virginia. The CIA had identified a problem in their Moscow station operations. The Moscow rules, the standard operating procedures for spies in the city, were becoming less effective. The KGB's surveillance teams, the legendary 7th Directorate, were smothering traditional case officers. They needed a new approach. They needed non-official cover, no C officers who had no link to the embassy, no diplomatic immunity, and a cover so deep it could withstand intense scrutiny. Elias Thorne was selected for his temperament. He was a man of quiet intensity, capable of sitting in silence for hours, a trait essential for the long, boring stretches of surveillance work. He spoke fluent Russian, but with a slight, deliberate accent that he would need to maintain to appear as a foreigner who had learned the language later in life. Julianne Vlessing was chosen for her empathy. A former academic with a background in Slavic literature, she possessed a natural warmth that disarmed people. She could make anyone feel like the most important person in the room, a weaponized social grace. They met for the first time in a briefing room at The Farm, the CIA's training facility. There was no romance. The meeting was conducted like a business merger. A senior case officer laid out the files on the table. "You will be married," he told them. "You will have a history. You will have inside jokes, shared memories of a honeymoon you never took, and grief over a dog you never owned." For 6 months, Elias and Julianne underwent marriage training. It was a bizarre, grueling psychological boot camp. They were placed in a mock suburban house and monitored. They had to learn each other's rhythms. Elias had to learn how Julianne took her tea. Julianne had to learn the specific way Elias folded his laundry. They memorized a fabricated timeline of their relationship. Met in Chicago in 1968, married in 1970, moved to New York in 1972. They spent hours looking at photos of strangers, assigning them names of relatives they would need to reference in casual conversation. But the most difficult part was the physical proximity. They were told they would be sleeping in the same bed in Moscow because Soviet apartments were small, and separate bedrooms for a married couple would look suspicious. They had to become comfortable with each other's physical presence without crossing the line into actual intimacy, which could complicate the mission. It was a professional cohabitation, a sterile intimacy. The agency created the legend of Thomas and Sarah Reardon with painstaking detail. Thomas was hired by a legitimate American manufacturing firm that had been quietly incentivized by the US government to open a Moscow office. The company had no idea Thomas was CIA. They just thought he was their new, highly recommended rep. This provided the commercial cover. Sarah was given a background in art history, giving her a reason to frequent the museums and galleries where the Soviet elite congregated. The final test came a week before deployment. They were subjected to a hostile interrogation simulation. Separated and questioned for 12 hours, they had to keep their stories straight. What did you eat for dinner on your first anniversary? What is your mother-in-law's middle name? When was the last time you fought? They passed, but barely. The interrogator noted in his final report, the subjects are proficient in the facts of their legend, but they lack the unspoken language of a couple married for 6 years. They are too polite to each other. Elias and Julianne took the note to heart. They realized that a real marriage wasn't just about affection, it was about friction. They needed to learn how to be annoyed with each other. Arriving in Moscow in the mid-70s was like stepping onto another planet. The air smelled of low-grade diesel and unfiltered tobacco. The colors were muted, grays, browns, and the ubiquitous red of state propaganda. The Reardons moved into their apartment on Kutuzovsky Prospect, a prestigious address that signaled their status as valued foreign guests, but also marked them as targets. The apartment was spacious by Soviet standards, but felt claustrophobic to Elias and Julianne. Before they unpacked a single suitcase, they assumed the space was hot. The CIA technical division had warned them, assume microphones in the bedrooms, the living room, and the kitchen. Assume pinhole cameras in the walls. Assume the telephone is tapped. Assume the neighbors are informants. Living in the goldfish bowl required a level of mental discipline that was exhausting. They could never drop character. When Elias came home from his office, he couldn't slump on the couch and debrief the day's intelligence. He had to complain about shipment delays of tractors or the bureaucracy of the Soviet Trade Ministry. When Julianne returned from the market, she couldn't talk about the surveillance team she had spotted trailing her. She had to complain about the quality of the vegetables. They developed a system of nonverbal communication. A specific tap on the wrist meant, "I think we are being followed." A hand run through the hair meant, "I have information." For critical mission discussions, they had only one safe option: the walk. They would go to Gorky Park, ostensibly for fresh air. In the open space, amidst the noise of the wind and the crowds, they could whisper brief operational updates. But even then, they had to be careful of parabolic microphones. The psychological toll was immediate. In the apartment, they shared a bed. They slept back to back, a wall of pillows between them during the first few weeks. The intimacy of sleeping next to a stranger who was also your only ally created a confusing dynamic. They were isolated from the world, dependent entirely on each other. To sell the reality of their marriage to the listeners in the walls, they began to stage arguments. This was the friction the instructors had talked about. They would script these fights while walking in the park. "Tonight," Elias would whisper as they watched ducks on a frozen pond. "Yell at me about working too late. Really let me have it." "Okay," Julianne would reply, smiling for the benefit of any watchers. "But you have to accuse me of spending too much money at the Beryozka shop." That night, they would execute the performance. Julianne would raise her voice, her tone shrill and genuine. Elias would shout back, slamming doors. It was theater, but it was also catharsis. It allowed them to release the real tension of their situation under the guise of fake marital discord. The KGB analysts listening to the tapes would note, "Subject Reardon and wife are experiencing domestic strain due to isolation," and file it away as a vulnerability, unaware that the strain was manufactured. But as the months dragged on, the line between the performance and reality began to blur. The isolation was real. The stress was real. And sometimes when Elias held Julianne's hand at a diplomatic reception, the squeeze of reassurance felt less like tradecraft and more like a lifeline. They were becoming a unit, forged not by love, but by survival. Viktor Volkov was not a man easily found. He was a ghost within the system. As a colonel in the 1st Chief Directorate, he oversaw counterintelligence operations against Western assets in Europe. He was the enemy. He was the man who caught spies. The audacity of Operation Azure Zenith was that it sought to turn the hunter into the hunted. The CIA dossier on Volkov was thick but filled with gaps. They knew he was 52 years old, a widower for 5 years. They knew he had an estrangement from his only son, who was serving in the military in Vladivostok. They knew he was a workaholic who spent late nights at the Lubyanka. But the key to the operation lay in the soft file. The section detailed his personal predilections. Volkov had a weakness. Before his rise in the KGB, he had served as a junior attaché in London in the 1950s. He had developed a taste for English literature and American jazz, specifically the chaotic, improvisational bebop of the post-war era. In the Soviet Union of the 1970s, such things were decadent, bourgeois, and frowned upon. Possessing them wasn't illegal for a man of his rank, but flaunting them was political suicide. Elias and Julianne's mission was to insert themselves into Volkov's orbit. They couldn't approach him directly. That would trigger his counterintelligence instincts. They had to make him come to them. They began to cultivate a cover within a cover. They positioned themselves as the cultured Americans. Julianne volunteered at the Pushkin Museum, offering to help with English translations for catalogs. Elias made sure to be seen reading classic Russian literature in public. They attended every concert, every gallery opening, every cultural exchange event allowed to foreigners. They were fishing. The bait was their apparent appreciation for the soul of Russia. Combined with their access to the Western culture Volkov secretly craved, it took 4 months of trolling the diplomatic circuit before they spotted him. It was at a reception at the French embassy. The room was filled with smoke and the murmur of French and Russian. Volkov was standing near a window, holding a glass of mineral water, looking utterly bored. He looked exactly like his photos. Sharp features, gray steel hair, a suit that fit better than the standard Soviet cut. Elias nudged Julianne. 3 o'clock, the gray suit. Julianne glanced over the rim of her champagne glass. He looks miserable. Perfect, Elias murmured. Go. This was the dynamic of their partnership. Elias was the strategist. Julianne was the closer. She moved through the crowd, not directly toward Volkov, but to a painting hanging on the wall near him. It was a landscape, moody and abstract. She stood there for a long time, just looking at it. She waited until Volkov shifted his weight, preparing to leave. Then she spoke, not to him, but to the painting, in perfect, grammatically complex Russian. It captures the melancholy of November, doesn't it? That specific gray you only see in Moscow. Volkov stopped. He turned to look at this American woman. He had expected her to speak English, or clumsy, broken Russian. You speak the language well, he said, his voice dry, guarded. Julianne turned, feigning surprise. Oh, thank you. I have a good teacher. Dostoevsky. A flicker of interest in Volkov's eyes. A heavy teacher for a diplomat's wife. I'm not a diplomat's wife, she corrected him with a smile. My husband sells tractors. I just admire the soul of your country. It was a scripted line, but she delivered it with such genuine warmth that Volkov didn't walk away. They spoke for 5 minutes. She didn't ask him what he did. She didn't ask for his name. She talked about the painting. Then she signaled Elias. Elias approached, playing the role of the slightly bumbling but good-natured husband. Sarah, darling, we should probably head out. The driver is waiting. He looked at Volkov and nodded politely, deferentially. Good evening, sir. They left before Volkov could ask who they were. That was the hook. Leave the target wanting to know more. In the car ride home, they didn't speak, but Elias squeezed her hand. Step 1 was complete. The ghost had been seen. The accidental second meeting was engineered with military precision. The CIA station in Moscow had a source in the box office of the Bolshoi Theater. They learned that Volkov had tickets for a performance of Swan Lake on a Thursday night. Miraculously, Thomas and Sarah Reardon also acquired tickets for the same night, 3 rows behind him. During the intermission, they found him in the lobby. This time, Volkov recognized them. In a city as closed as Moscow, familiar faces were rare. He nodded to Julianne. "The student of Dostoevsky," Volkov said, a hint of a smile on his thin lips. "And the critic of landscapes," Julianne replied. She introduced Elias. "My husband, Thomas." Elias shook Volkov's hand. He noted the callus on the middle finger, a writer, or someone who signed many documents. "Pleasure. I admit, the ballet isn't my usual scene. I'm more of a jazz man myself, but my wife insists I get some culture." It was a dangerous drop. Mentioning jazz to a senior KGB officer was a gamble. It could have been interpreted as a provocation. Volkov's eyes narrowed slightly. "Jazz? That is, chaotic music." "Controlled chaos," Elias said, quoting a line from a Miles Davis biography he had memorized. "It's about the notes they don't play." Volkov looked at Elias for a long moment. The air between them crackled with the unseen tension of the Cold War. Then the colonel's shoulders dropped, just a fraction. "Controlled chaos," Volkov repeated. An interesting perspective. By the end of the intermission, they had an invitation, not to the Lubyanka, but to tea. It was a small, tentative step. Over the next 2 months, the Reardons carefully cultivated the relationship. They were the perfect, non-threatening Americans. They weren't curious about politics. They didn't ask about his work. They were just pleasant. For Volkov, they became an escape. When he was with them, he wasn't the feared colonel. He was just Victor. They invited him to their apartment for dinner. This was the moment of highest risk. Bringing a KGB officer into a CIA safe house, even one disguised as a civilian apartment, was walking a tightrope. The apartment had to be scrubbed. Not of bugs, those were there to stay, but of anything that screamed spy. No cipher pads, no hidden cameras, except the ones the CIA had installed deep in the walls, which Volkov would hopefully not find. They had to lay out bait props. A stack of American vinyl records left casually by the record player, a bottle of high-end bourbon. The dinner party was a surreal performance. Elias cooked steaks, a rare luxury, while Julianne played the piano. Volkov sat in their armchair, drinking the bourbon, watching them. "You are a lucky man, Thomas," Volkov said, looking at Julianne. "To have such a home, such peace." "We have our moments," Elias said, laughing. "You should have heard us arguing about the grocery list this morning. That is life," Volkov said, his voice heavy with the weight of his own solitude. "Silence is the worst argument." That night, Volkov stayed late. He didn't talk about state secrets. He talked about his late wife. He talked about his son who never wrote. He drank more than he should have. For Elias and Julianne, it was exhausting. They had to be empathetic, alert, and recording every word in their memories for the debriefing report they would write later. But as Volkov left, he did something unexpected. He pulled a small book from his coat pocket and handed it to Elias. It was a volume of poetry, banned in the Soviet Union, samizdat. "Read this," Volkov said. "It explains the chaos better than jazz." It was a test. If they reported him, he would know. If they kept it, they were complicit. They had entered the conspiracy. 6 months into the operation, the Reardon marriage was fraying at the edges. Not because the cover was weak, but because the reality was becoming too strong. The stress of the double life was creating a dependency between Elias and Julianne that terrified them both. They were spending more time with Volkov. He came over weekly now. He brought them gifts: caviar, vodka, tickets to closed events. In return, they gave him the illusion of family. He called them "my Americans." He began to drop his guard. He made cynical jokes about the party leadership. He criticized the inefficiency of the Soviet economy. These were dangerous statements, crimes under Article 70 of the Penal Code. Elias and Julianne had to navigate these conversations perfectly. If they agreed too enthusiastically, they looked like provocateurs. If they disagreed, they looked like party toadies. They had to strike a balance of sympathetic neutrality, but the real pressure was internal. After Volkov would leave, the adrenaline crash would hit them. They would sit on the floor of their bathroom, the only room they felt was slightly safer from the microphones if they ran the shower, and debrief. He mentioned the deployment in East Berlin, Elias whispered, staring at the tiles. "Did you catch that?" He said, "The November movements." "I caught it," Julianne whispered back. She looked pale, dark circles under her eyes. "He also looked at me tonight." "Different." Elias looked up. "How?" "Like he wanted to tell me something, or warn me." The intimacy of the mission was forcing them into emotional corners. Elias found himself feeling a protective jealousy over Julianne, not as an asset, but as a woman. When Volkov focused his attention on her, using her as his emotional crutch, Elias felt a spike of anger that had no place in a professional operation. One night, after a particularly tense dinner where Volkov had almost broken down crying about his wife, Elias and Julianne lay in their shared bed. The lights were out. The bugs were listening. "He's lonely," Julianne whispered, her back to Elias. "He's just a sad, lonely old man." "He's a killer, Sarah," Elias said, using her cover name even in the dark. "He signed the execution orders for the network in Prague in '68. Never forget that." "I know," she said, her voice trembled. "But it's hard to hate someone when you're pouring them tea and listening to them cry." Elias rolled over and, for the first time in the mission, broke the physical barrier. He put an arm around her waist. It was meant to be comforting, a human gesture in a world of inhuman pressure. She stiffened, then relaxed, leaning back into him. "We have to be careful," Elias whispered into her hair. "If we start seeing him as a friend, we're dead." "I'm not seeing him as a friend," she replied. "I'm just tired of lying to everyone, including us." That night, the lines of the operation shifted. They weren't just partners anymore. They were conspirators in the deepest sense. And Volkov, the sharp-eyed spy hunter, was beginning to notice that the Reardons were perhaps too perfect, too understanding, and too available. The game was about to change. Volkov wasn't just consuming their hospitality, he was studying them. And the CIA demands were increasing. Headquarters didn't just want character profiles anymore. They wanted documents. They wanted names. They wanted Elias and Julianne to stop fishing and start reeling him in. The next week, Elias received a signal from a brush pass in Gorky Park. A new directive from Langley. Status: urgent. Target access confirmed. Initiate Phase 2. Obtain visuals on the Azure file. Phase 2 meant moving from friendship to betrayal. It meant exploiting the man who sat at their table and drank their bourbon. And it meant that the fake marriage of Thomas and Sarah Reardon was about to face its ultimate test. Could they destroy a man they had learned to care for without destroying themselves in the process? By the autumn of 1976, the air in Moscow had turned sharp and biting, a physical manifestation of the tightening noose around Elias and Julianne. The directive from Langley regarding the Azure file was not a suggestion, it was an ultimatum. The agency had received intelligence that Colonel Volkov was the primary architect of a new KGB counterintelligence doctrine, a strategy designed to blind American satellites and double-cross human assets across Eastern Europe. The Azure file was the blueprint for this blindness. The problem was access. Volkov was disciplined. He never discussed specific operational details, and he certainly never left classified documents lying around on coffee tables. However, Elias had noticed a pattern. On Thursday nights, when Volkov came for his escape evenings at the Reardon apartment, he came directly from the Lubyanka. He always brought his leather briefcase. He always placed it by the coat rack in the hallway, never in the living room, but never out of his line of sight when he moved between the kitchen and the seating area. He never locks it when he's here, Elias noted during a whispered strategy session in the shower, the water running hot and loud to mask their voices. "He trusts us. That's the vulnerability." "He doesn't trust us," Julianne corrected, her voice tight. He thinks we are harmless. There is a difference. We need 10 minutes, Elias said. 10 minutes with that bag. I have the Minox camera. I just need you to get him out of the hallway. The plan they devised was simple, domestic, and terrifyingly risky. It relied on the manufactured clumsiness of their fake life. They decided to weaponize the apartment's unreliable plumbing, a common complaint in Soviet housing that Volkov himself had joked about. On the appointed Thursday, the tension in the apartment was palpable. Julianne had spent the afternoon pacing, her stomach in knots. Elias was unnaturally calm, checking the tiny camera hidden in a hollowed-out fountain pen for the 10th time. When Volkov arrived, he looked exhausted, the gray circles under his eyes darker than usual. "The winter comes early," Volkov muttered, handing his heavy wool coat to Elias. He placed the briefcase by the rack. The heavy thud of the leather on the parquet floor sounded like a gavel strike. The evening proceeded according to the script. Drinks, jazz playing softly, the illusion of warmth. At 9:15 p.m., Julianne stood up to go to the kitchen for tea. This was the signal. "Oh, damn it," she exclaimed from the kitchen a moment later. "Thomas, the sink is backing up again. There's water everywhere." It was a performance for an audience of one. "Not again," Elias groaned, standing up. He looked at Volkov apologetically. "Victor, I'm sorry. The pipes in this building are ancient. I need to go find the superintendent's wrench." Volkov waved a hand. "Go. Soviet plumbing is the true enemy of the state." Elias went to the kitchen, made a show of banging pipes, and then whispered to Julianne, "Get him in here. Now." Julianne returned to the living room, wiping her hands on a towel. "Victor, could you help? Thomas is useless with the shut-off valve, and I'm afraid it's going to ruin the floor." It was a calculated indignity, asking a KGB colonel to help with plumbing, but it played into the domestic familiarity they had built. Volkov sighed, stood up, and walked past the hallway, into the kitchen. As soon as Volkov was under the sink, distracted by Julianne's frantic and fake instructions about where the water was coming from, Elias slipped out. He moved silently to the hallway. He had timed this. He had maybe 3 minutes before Volkov realized the valve was fine. Elias knelt by the briefcase. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly. He didn't need to pick the lock. Volkov hadn't engaged the clasps fully. He opened the lid. Inside were files, a pistol, and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Elias ignored the gun. He flipped through the files until he saw the blue border, the marker of high-level clearance, Project Azure. He pulled the documents, laid them on the floor, and began snapping photos with the pen camera. Click, flip, click, flip. From the kitchen, he heard Volkov's voice. "There is no leak here, Sarah. The valve is dry." "It was spraying a second ago," Julianne insisted. Her voice was rising, buying him seconds. "Look at the back pipe." Elias snapped the last page. He shoved the file back into the case, closed the lid, and stood up just as footsteps echoed in the corridor. He didn't have time to move away. He grabbed his coat from the rack above the bag, pretending he had been searching for something in the pockets. Volkov appeared in the doorway, dusting his knees. He stopped. He looked at Elias, then at the briefcase, then back at Elias. "Found the wrench?" Volkov asked. His voice was neutral, but his eyes were scanning. "No," Elias said, holding up a pack of cigarettes he had pulled from his coat. "Just my nerves. Sorry about the false alarm, Victor. Maybe it was just a pressure burp in the line." Volkov stared at him for a beat too long. "Pressure," he said slowly. "Yes, pressure makes pipes do strange things." He walked over, picked up his briefcase, and checked the clasps. They hadn't been locked before, and they weren't locked now. But the way he ran his thumb over the leather suggested he knew the air in the hallway had been disturbed. "I should go," Volkov said abruptly. "I have an early morning." He didn't finish his tea. He didn't say goodbye to Julianne. He just walked out. When the door clicked shut, Elias slumped against the wall, sweat soaking his shirt. They had the photos, but they might have just lost the man. The fallout was immediate. For 3 weeks, Volkov went silent. He didn't call. He didn't appear at the theater. The Azure photos were successfully passed to a handler during a brush pass at a crowded metro station, and the feedback from Langley was ecstatic. The intelligence was gold. It revealed the names of 3 double agents in the French government. But inside the apartment on Kutuzovsky Prospect, the atmosphere was funereal. Elias and Julianne knew the silence meant one of 2 things. Either Volkov was busy, or he was building a case against them. "We should request extraction," Julianne argued one night, scribbling on a notepad she would burn later. "He knows." "If he knew, we'd be in the cells at Lefortovo," Elias countered. "He suspects. That's different. He's testing us." The test came in the form of a phone call at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Thomas." Volkov's voice was slurred. He was drunk. "I am at the Aragvi restaurant. I cannot drive. Come get me." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Elias drove the company car, a black Volga, through the empty, snow-dusted streets. He found Volkov sitting alone at a table covered in empty bottles. The restaurant was closed, the staff waiting fearfully in the shadows for the KGB man to leave. Volkov looked up as Elias approached. His eyes were red, unfocused, but there was a sharp intelligence behind the haze. "The American comes," Volkov sneered. "The loyal friend." Elias sat down. "You called, Victor. I'm here. Let's get you home." "Home?" Volkov laughed bitterly. "I have no home. I have an apartment full of ghosts." He leaned forward, grabbing Elias's wrist. His grip was like iron. "Why were you in the hallway, Thomas, that night?" Elias didn't blink. He had rehearsed this lie 1,000 times. "I told you, I was getting cigarettes." "You don't smoke in the house," Volkov hissed. "Sarah hates it." It was a trap, a small detail from their legend that Elias had forgotten in the heat of the moment. "I was stressed," Elias said, his voice steady. "The plumbing, work. Sarah has been difficult lately. I needed a smoke." Volkov studied his face, searching for the tic, the sweat, the micro-expression of guilt. "She is difficult? Your perfect wife?" "No wife is perfect, Victor. You know that." Volkov released his wrist. He slumped back. "No, they are not. But at least yours is real." He let Elias drive him home. In the car, Volkov passed out. Elias considered driving straight to the U.S. Embassy, crashing the gate and dumping the colonel on the Marines. It would be the defection of the century, but he couldn't. His orders were to maintain the cover until the network was fully mapped. When he dragged Volkov to his door, the colonel woke up briefly. He looked at Elias with a sadness that was more terrifying than his anger. "Be careful, Thomas," Volkov whispered. "My friends are asking about you. They ask why the American tractor salesman has such steady hands." It was a warning. Volkov was protecting them for now, but the shield was cracking. The warning from Volkov changed the dynamic of the marriage. Elias and Julianne were no longer just acting for the microphones. They were living in a state of siege. The paranoia turned inward. "You're pacing again," Elias snapped one evening. "I'm not pacing, I'm thinking," Julianne retorted. "He said his friends are asking. That means the second chief directorate. They're looking at our background." "Our background is solid. The company backstopped it." "Nothing is solid." Julianne's voice broke. She sat on the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "I can't do this anymore, Elias. I can't look him in the eye and pretend I care about him while we steal his life." Elias sat next to her. The professional distance they had maintained for nearly a year was eroding under the pressure. He saw her not as an asset, but as a terrified woman who had been pushed too far. "We're almost done," he said softly. "Langley says 1 more month, then we rotate out." "We won't make it a month," she whispered. "He knows. He's just waiting for proof." The breakdown happened the next day. Julianne was at the market when she felt the surveillance. It wasn't the usual clumsy tracking by low-level tails. This was aggressive. 3 men coordinating. They bumped into her. They let her see them. It was intimidation surveillance, a tactic used to flush out a target, to make them panic and run. She returned to the apartment, pale and shaking. She wrote on the notepad, "Aggressive surveillance. 3 men. They wanted me to see them." Elias stared at the note. "They're tightening the net. We need to leave," she mouthed. "Not yet. If we run now, we confirm everything. We have to act normal." Act normal? Julianne stood up and walked to the kitchen, speaking loudly for the bugs. Thomas, I am so tired of this city. I want to go to Paris for the weekend. Can't we just leave? Elias followed her, picking up the cue. We can't just leave, Sarah. I have contracts. To hell with your contracts. She threw a plate on the floor. It shattered. The noise was shocking in the small space. For the listeners, it was a marital breakdown. For Elias and Julianne, it was the sound of their reality fracturing. They stood amidst the porcelain shards, breathing heavily. I hate you, Julianne whispered, but her eyes were full of fear, pleading for him to fix this. I know, Elias whispered back. I'm sorry. That night, they slept fully clothed, their passports and emergency cash taped to their bodies. They were waiting for the knock on the door. It didn't come. Instead, the next morning, an envelope was slid under their door. It had no stamp. Inside was a single ticket to a performance of Hamlet for that evening, and a note in Volkov's handwriting. To be or not to be. Come alone, Thomas. Elias went to the theater alone. Julianne stayed behind, armed with a hidden pistol, ready to burn the apartment's contents at the first sign of trouble. The theater was packed, but the seat next to Elias remained empty until the lights went down. Then a figure slid into the darkness beside him. It wasn't Volkov. It was a younger man, sharp-featured, smelling of cheap cologne. Colonel Volkov sends his regrets, the man whispered. He is detained. Elias felt a cold spike of adrenaline. Detained? I don't understand. He is being questioned regarding his association with certain foreign elements, the man said. He wanted you to know that he has not spoken. Yet, the man placed a hand on Elias's arm. But everyone speaks eventually at Le Fortovo. You should enjoy the play, Mr. Reardon. It is a tragedy. Everyone dies in the end. The man got up and left. Elias didn't watch the play. He sat frozen, his mind racing. Volkov had been taken. The Azure leak had been traced back to him. The KGB had found the breach, and now they were squeezing the colonel to give up his accomplices. Volkov was holding out, buying them time. It was a final act of twisted friendship from the man they had betrayed. Elias left the theater at the intermission. He moved through the metro system, using every anti-surveillance route he knew, switching trains, doubling back, walking through crowded pedestrian tunnels. He managed to lose the tail, or at least he thought he did. He burst into the apartment. Pack, he said. Now, we have maybe an hour. Julianne didn't ask questions. She had the go bags ready. They began the process of sanitizing the apartment, shredding documents, dissolving codes in acid. But as they were heading to the door, the phone rang. In the silence of the apartment, the ring was deafening. Elias stared at it. Don't answer it. It might be the extraction team, Julianne said. Or it might be them checking if we're home. The phone rang 10 times. Then it stopped. They opened the door to the hallway. Standing there were 2 uniformed militia officers. Documents, the older officer demanded. They weren't KGB, they were regular police. This was a stalling tactic. The KGB was on the way. The police were just there to keep them in place. Is there a problem, officer? Elias asked, his Russian perfect, his demeanor indignant. I am a guest of the Trade Ministry. Routine check, the officer said, blocking the path. We have reports of a disturbance. Elias looked at Julianne. He gave a microscopic nod. Julianne smiled at the officer. Oh, officer, I'm so sorry. I dropped a plate earlier. I was just so clumsy. She moved closer, reaching into her purse. The officer's eyes dipped to her purse. In that split second, Elias moved. He didn't use a gun. He used a strike to the throat, quick and brutal. The officer gagged and went down. The second officer reached for his holster, but Julianne had already pulled a canister of tear gas from her purse and sprayed him point blank. Go! Elias shouted. They stepped over the gasping officers and ran for the stairwell. The elevator was a death trap. They took the stairs down 6 flights, bursting out into the freezing Moscow night. The game of cat and mouse was over. Now, it was a fox hunt. The CIA's emergency extraction plan for Moscow was known as the Pipeline. It involved a series of car swaps, safe houses, and finally, a hidden compartment in a diplomatic cargo truck crossing the Finnish border. But the pipeline assumed you had a head start. Elias and Julianne had minutes. They couldn't go to the embassy. The streets around it would be ringed with KGB surveillance cars. They had to go underground. They ran to a pre-arranged dead-drop location, a public locker at the Kievsky railway station. Inside was a set of fresh clothes, license plates, and keys to a nondescript Lada parked 3 blocks away. They changed in the filthy station bathrooms. Julianne cut her hair and dyed it black with a kit from the bag. Elias put on workman's clothes and glasses. When they emerged, Thomas and Sarah Reardon were gone. They reached the Lada. It started with a reluctant cough. "Where are we going?" Julianne asked, navigating the map. "North," Elias said. "The border is too watched. We're going to Leningrad. There's a cargo ship leaving on Friday, the Helsinki Star. The captain is on the payroll." The drive was a nightmare of snow and fear. Every checkpoint was a potential end. They slept in the car in forests, taking turns keeping watch. The intimacy of the fake marriage was replaced by the raw survival of 2 soldiers. They didn't touch. They didn't speak of love or hate. They were a single organism focused on movement. 2 days later, on the outskirts of Leningrad, the car broke down. The radiator cracked in the bitter cold. They abandoned it and walked. They reached the docks under the cover of a blizzard. The Helsinki Star was a dark shape against the gray ice of the harbor. They found the contact, a stevedore smoking a pipe. He took their code phrase and pointed them to a shipping container. "You stay in there," he grunted. 30 hours, no noise, no light. They climbed into the metal box. It was freezing. There were blankets and water, but no heat. As the crane lifted the container, swinging them into the air, Julianne grabbed Elias's hand. "Did we kill him?" she asked in the dark. "Volkov, did we kill him?" Elias squeezed her hand. "The system killed him, Julianne. We just gave them the excuse." It was a lie, and they both knew it. 3 days later, Elias Thorne and Julianne Vlessing walked into a safe house in Helsinki. They were dirty, malnourished, and suffering from hypothermia. They were alive. The debriefing took 2 weeks. The CIA team was jubilant. The Azure intelligence was dismantling Soviet networks across Europe. It was a massive victory. Elias and Julianne were heroes. But in the sterile white rooms of the debriefing center, they couldn't look at each other. The marriage was over. The legend of Thomas and Sarah Reardon had been burned. They were just Elias and Julianne again, 2 colleagues who had shared a bed, a life, and a crime for 18 months. On their last day in Helsinki, before they were flown back to the States to be reassigned, Elias found Julianne on the balcony, smoking a cigarette. She never smoked. "It's over," he said. "Is it?" She looked out at the snow. "I keep waiting for him to knock on the door." "He's gone, Jules. Intelligence confirmed it. He was executed 3 days after we left. Treason." The word hung in the air. "We made him love us," Julianne said, her voice hollow. "That was the mission. Make him lonely enough to trust us, and then steal his secrets. It's obscene." "It's the job," Elias said, but the words tasted like ash. "We saved lives. American lives." "Maybe," she said. She turned to him. "What happens to us now? Do we just shake hands and go back to our real lives?" Elias looked at the woman he knew better than anyone on earth. He knew how she slept, how she laughed, how she lied. He loved her. But it was a love built on a foundation of deceit. It was a love that belonged to Thomas Reardon, a man who didn't exist. "I don't think we can," Elias said. "Every time I look at you, I see the apartment. I see him." Julianne nodded. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. "You're right. We're ghosts to each other now." They flew back to Virginia on separate planes. They received medals in a closed ceremony. They were promoted. Elias Thorne went on to work in the Counterterrorism Center. He married a woman named Karen in 1980. They had 2 children. He was a good father, though sometimes on rainy Thursday nights he would sit in his study with a glass of bourbon and listen to jazz, staring at nothing. Julianne Vlessing left the agency in 1979. She moved to Vermont and taught literature. She never married. They saw each other only once more, 10 years later, at the funeral of a mutual colleague. They stood on opposite sides of the grave. They nodded. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The only words that mattered had been spoken in a bug department in Moscow by two people who were pretending to be someone else. The operation was a success. The intelligence was secured. The enemy was defeated. But in the silence of their own lives, Elias and Julianne carried the weight of the only truth they had found in Moscow, that the cost of winning the Cold War was often your own soul.